Hello folks, and welcome back to part 2 of this 3-part mini-series capturing the history of Turner Valley Gas Plant in Western Canada. In this episode, we learn a bit more as a follow-up to episode 1 about the work process and the ins and outs before we bring to you part 3 next week, which is a full plant tour, so you make sure you don't want to miss that one. So again, thanks for watching, please subscribe and share, and I apologize a bit for some of the sound quality in this episode. Thanks.
And were the drillers.
Okay.
So their names are Martin Hovis and Joseph Brown. Martin is on the left and Joseph on the right. And they stood on that drill platform for that 16 months that it took to drill that well until it finally came in and was used back in the day. Eventually they did change to cable, even on Dingman number 1, but initially it's a hemp rope that they used.
Okay.
And that's the drilling pole going down. They're standing on the deck of the drilling rig. And that kind of metal piece that you see that's sort of circular, that's something that they would have used to attach their string of drilling tools. So they would have used that on these drilling tools. You can see their the ends here. They would twist together. So they would be run along that, so we could twist them together, and then they'd be added to something called a drill string. So there'd be a number of pieces of equipment on the string that is down the hole there, but it's cable tool drilling, not rotary. So what that means is it's constantly just pounding up and down with a bit, very much like the one you see. And every so often that would come out, and we'd have a blacksmith sharpen it up again. There was always a blacksmith on site. Then they'd pour water down the hole, and all of the water and what was pounded up below would make a slurry. Then they'd change to a tool like this, a baling tool, and they would put that tool down the hole and they'd pull out that slurry. And that's how they'd advance the hole downward.
It must have taken forever.
Long, arduous process. Very much so, yeah. And very different from the rotary drilling that we do today. So these gentlemen had been doing this for a number of years, even by this time. So he's holding onto that rope, and it said that he could hang onto that rope, and just by the vibrations in the rope, he would know what they were hitting down below, what layer they were at, what type of rock they were going through. Apparently he was that knowledgeable.
That much experience,
Yeah. And this gives you an idea of the process. So it's a steam-generated piece of equipment that would turn these wheels, and then you've got your drill string going up and down. And if you look down below, you can see the bit. It's very much like the bit we have over here. And that's the process. It was that simple. Just pounding up and down into the rock.
Wow.
So Dingman number 1, if you look behind us, what that depicts. And it also tells you about Dingman number 2, which was also drilled on site as well, and how far it went down.
So they had a little teaser, so to speak, on the way down. But how did they establish to begin with where to start drilling?
We'll talk about that when we go outside.
Okay.
Yeah. The layers are like this often, right? So they've drilled down, and we always have water, and then we have oil, and then we have a gas. So what happened is they drilled and they hit the gas cap. They didn't hit oil. If they drilled sulfuric acid,
that's not a good thing, no.
So we keep it in there. It's a slim chance it would happen, but we have to keep it covered for that reason. That is sulfur we picked up from site just around the sulfur plant. It's just on the other side of the road. So we talked about 1914 and Dingman number 1. We talked about 1924 and Royalite number 4 was the name of that well. And now we are at 1936. And this is the 3rd boom in the area. And this is where we finally do strike that crude oil that they've been looking for. So that happens just north of Longview a little ways. That is when the crude oil came into play. So this facility is a gas processing plant. And the wells on site here, Dingman 1 and Dingman 2 and Royalite number 4 down the road, those were gas wells, not oil wells.
Okay.
So with the discovery of the crude oil in the area, we've also got some other things happening in this time period. We're starting to see some little pipelines going into Okotoks to tie into gas lines that are now going into Calgary. And the Alberta government at the time is saying, you guys are flaring all this gas away. You're wasting our resources. We want you to stop doing that. So this is also the birthplace of the Energy Resources Conservation Board. All of that started in this field. So that begins, and we stop seeing so much of the flaring. Now we are sending some of that gas through lines and getting it into Calgary for use. So that's one of the changes in that time period.
I have a question here. This is when the boom was, right? 36 to 45? The population of Trinidad was around that.
Exact, I don't know, but we'll talk about some ballpark numbers. Tons of people flooded the area, and there were probably a few thousand in Turner. Longview was called Little New York, and there was over 10,000 people there. Just north of Longview is a little community called Royalties. There was 1,000 people there. There's another small community with about 800 people. So it was Little New York, Little Philadelphia, and Little Chicago. Communities. And then in Turner Valley area, there was a number of little pockets of people that kind of came together and lived in the same area. So we would have, just over the hill here, there was some residents there, and that was referred to as Dog Pound. And then up, when we get outside, I'll point out Snob Hill, where the management would have lived. That's called Royal Light Way. It's still there today. In this direction, over by our settling ponds, was Poverty Flats. And there was an area called Whiskey Row. It was just all these different little communities within the community that popped out. Time period when we had all of those people moving into the area. It's Little New York days. It's, I think, the second weekend in July, so it's still something pretty ingrained in there.
So because they're using American names, I imagine a lot of Americans came up here to work.
There were a number of Americans that came up. There were a number that came over from Saskatchewan to work in the industry, significantly, because as you can imagine, we need fuel and gasoline, and the products we're producing were in high demand during wartime. So the Horton spheres were put in, and they started isolating isobutane, it was called, and putting it in those spheres. Then that isobutane was trucked from here into Calgary, where it was processed further, and it was used in the training jets for the fighter pilots for to Calgary.
Is that the predecessor then what we know as kerosene these days?
I'm not sure if it would be similar. All I've been told is it was an additive to the aviation fuel. So that went on during the war effort, but following the war, there was no need for that. So even though they're one of the most significant things we see when we're on site or we're driving by, they haven't been used since the late 40s. They've sat empty ever since. Threat from the enemy. So we have towers erected around the site with spotlights. We start making the workers wear name badges with their photo on them so that they can come and go to work. So a lot of those processes, if you work in a facility, you see that today. Everybody has their badge and their photo on it. That's part of the security that they use. So a lot of that started right here on this site.
It's hard to believe Little Turner Valley, 95% of the oil and gas came from here for Canada.
Yeah, during that time period, it was one of the biggest producers.
Wow.
The plant did shut down. Very likely because when we go outside and we walk around, you'll see this plant was built in 1933, most of it. There were some additions later on, but the gasoline plant started in 1923 and it ran continuously until 1985. So at 1985, we're at a point where environmental standards have changed to the point where this plant is probably not meeting them anymore. They've probably been given some grace because they've been around a long time, but they were probably told, okay guys, you need to bring this up to today's standards. In order to do that, it would be so expensive that it wasn't worth the oil companies' time. So they decided to shut it down. So
it was not like they started to run out of product, it was just...
No, we're still drawing from this same gas field today. You can hear a faint hum of some compressors. That is being drawn from the field, compressed and sent for processing down the line further. It's a company called Crescent Point. So we're still drawing. You see the pump jacks on the way along here, same field. So we're still producing from that field. So the company that owns it at this time is called Western DeKalb. They took over and were running the plant for the years leading up to the point where it shut down. So they approached the Alberta government and said, we feel this is a fairly significant piece of history in the area, and significant history to the oil and gas industry. So the Alberta government studied and took a look at it and said, yeah, we see the significance. So in 1988, they gave it provincial heritage status, and they started to do the reclamation and removal open that we'll be able to walk through, and we have a nice path, pebble path constructed. That is all new this year. Previously, we were just walking for the buildings on site.